Deltarune is pretty hard, but what if we made it even harder? Hey, I'm Azu, and for the past few months, I've been trying to beat Deltarune without the use of Ralsei, items, or equipment, and it has not been easy. Apart from impossible puzzles, ridiculous spikes in difficulty, and hours of grinding, there were also super challenging battles that I have not enjoyed. Last time, we finished a good bit of Deltarune Chapter 4 without Ralsei, and after defeating Mike early, since I didn't want it to turn into a really long video, was able to move on to the secret boss of Chapter 4, Gerson Boom. Also, if you have enjoyed the series thus far, then please consider subscribing, as it helps out a ton. Thanks. Here we go again. Jumping straight into the action, after opening the secret door using the golden piano's code, we could enter the secret boss room. Chapter 4's secret boss is the Hammer of Justice, which is Gerson Boom's fighting form. In a regular run, you must attack with Susie in order to gain these stars. Once enough stars have been gained, you could then begin a final attack, which, after surviving, ends the fight with Susie beating the Hammer of Justice. However, Ralsei doesn't appear at all in this fight, as it is a one-on-one against Gerson Boom with Susie. This makes the fight much easier, but also much more boring. So, instead of doing the bare minimum of what the challenge demanded, I decided to spice it up myself. Since Ralsei isn't in this boss fight, I would just substitute Susie for Ralsei. Now, you're probably wondering, how would you even beat Gerson if you can't use your only party member? Well, that's the neat part. You don't. By using Spare with Susie, which has no effect on Gerson at all, you could still activate all of his attacks, and after reaching a certain stage of the fight near the end, surviving his attacks will give you the same gold stars that you usually get from attacking. This meant that by surviving enough attacks, I could still activate the finale sequence and win the fight. However, the attacks which give the yellow stars are also the hardest attacks in the boss fight, having countless bullets coming at you from every direction. Furthermore, since I wasn't allowed any equipment, Gerson dealt much more damage to me than normal, allowing me to take much less hits. Although I was doing an old recruits run and therefore had less HP than if I was using violence, I believe that both the lack of armor and HP wouldn't have an effect on this boss fight, as Gerson's damage scaled based on your current HP. So if you have max HP, he does about half your health, but when you're low on HP, he only does very little. So I assumed that since it scaled, the armor and max HP of the player wouldn't matter, as the damage would scale accordingly, allowing you to survive the same amount of hits as every other run. But I was heavily mistaken, as when I was practicing this boss fight, I was able to take many more hits compared to when I didn't have any armor. This was concerning, to say the least. While the first few sets of attacks weren't difficult and I could no-hit them with ease, since we can't heal or defend in order to reduce damage, this fight got much harder, especially with the later, more chaotic attacks. The primary place I would die would be this attack, since the increasing speed of the bullets made it really hard to read. Even after reacting to the direction the bullet was coming from, I would sometimes miss the small arrow keys of my keyboard, leading to many deaths. After hours of grinding this boss fight, I reached this attack again, this time having taken little to no damage previously. At this point, I'd gotten much better at avoiding this attack, and would only get hit 2 or 3 times. Next came the extremely slow bullets. These are much easier than the fast ones, since as long as you stayed focused, you could plan out your movements beforehand, making it much easier than the reaction time based attack. Then came an extremely difficult attack, where shells and bullets came from every direction. In this attack, you needed to keep track of where each shell would land after you deflected it, and also block bullets at the same time. I would always get hit at least once here, since it was complete pandemonium, and usually that would be enough to kill me, but this time I survived the attack with 13 HP, due to my previous good performance during the early attacks. Enough to survive one more hit. Then, the final attack began. This attack is primarily shell-based, and after surviving tons, and I mean tons, of shells, you would get hit by an attack reminiscent of Sans' final attack from Undertale. Let's do this. By the way, in the middle of evading that attack, my arrow keys just stopped working for a second. So, that was cool. If I'd have taken damage one more time during any part of that fight, I would have been toast. After collecting the Justice Axe and the Shadow Crystal from Gerson, we moved on. And after chasing the knight, we sealed the very first Dark Fountain of Chapter 4. Yup, there's more than one. Next, we discovered Gerson's remains in the Light World, and had Susie make her own Dark World, creating the second sanctuary, which we promptly entered. This is where we encountered Wingblade. Wingblade is a very simple fight for this challenge, as Ralsei is not in it at all. You can just use Spin S twice, then spare with both Chris and Susie on the next turn in order to recruit them. After riding a piano around, we encountered Organic, where you can use the act Harmonize in order to potentially gain more mercy. However, it will make the attacks more difficult to avoid, as you must also take into account reaching the green lines in order to gain mercy, making it a high risk, high reward strategy, as if it is done right, you can even get them to 100% mercy in a single turn. The other Organic just required 2 performs from Chris in order to spare, making for an easy recruit. After taking a save and hearing Susie's emotional story, we encountered Weakerbell. This fight consists of Chris using the act Tuning and timing the hit. Fun fact, this act has the same UI as Undertale's attack screen. After just 2 tunings, Weakerbell reached 100% mercy and could be spared. Next, we made a grand escape from the huge mass of darkness and entered the old man's study, where we began the next mini-boss. This mini-boss is almost entirely sound reliant, where you have to listen for the direction from which the bullets are coming. This fight is pretty simple, since after you survive enough turns, Ralsei comes in to save the day. This was never a hard fight, since even if you didn't hear the sound well, there were still lights that showed up signaling each bullet's direction. After easily surviving enough turns, we finished the fight, learned the door code, sealed yet another fountain, and entered the third sanctuary, where we encountered yet another Bibliox and Wingblade. These are enemies we have already spared, so I'll just skip past them. By the way, something cool to do in this part of the game is during this sequence, where you need to evade the darkness spawns being thrown at you, is to go right here in order to find an invisible pathway. Here you can get some extra lore, such as Susie's reaction to seeing the angel, being able to see Asgore, and also getting the egg. On the way back, you also fight a Balthazar, Mizzle and Gwei at the same time, which is actually kind of a hard fight, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. Just reuse the strategy from earlier, and you should be fine. After escaping the darkness once more, this time on a piano, we climbed the large glass tower with the help of Jackenstein and the rest of our recruits, and were off on the journey to confront the Roaring Knight yet again. After going through an intense sequence in the darkness, we encountered the Roaring Knight, who, after spotting us, made another fountain in the Dark World, creating a Titan. How many fountains is that now that he's made? 3? 4 if we include Susie? Why are there so many fountains in this chat? After climbing our way to the top of the Titan's pillar, taking a bit of damage in the process, we attacked the Titan and finished the first climb. Next up was the fight with the Titan spawns. This fight is pretty simple. Just gain enough TP to use the Act Banish with Chris, while evading their attacks in the process. However, since TP gain is restricted outside of Courage, using the Act Brighten is highly recommended, as it increases the radius of your shined light, allowing you to collect Courage faster and with less risk. But this fight does need Ralsei, so you have to take your chances without Brighten, and after a few turns, we banished the 2 spawns. After jumping back onto the tower and making our way up it, this time taking much more damage in the process, we finally made it to the top, where we encountered the final boss of Deltarune Chapter 4, the Titan. If you've played this fight before, you know that you must acquire enough TP to use the Act Unleash with Chris, reminiscent of the Titan Spawn and Jackenstein fights, in order to lower the defenses of the Titan dramatically, allowing you to deal more damage. There is no way to spare the Titan boss, so you gotta defeat it with violence, which was pretty bad news for me since, I have no weapons whatsoever. I mean, I'm literally using the basic equipment you get at the start of the game. All the way back in Chapter 1. I am so weak. Once the Titan reaches 50% HP or less, the fight basically ends. So that's your goal. In all the runs where I've beat this boss, it wasn't a problem or challenge in the slightest. Chris would deal insane amounts of damage due to giving them the Black Shard, dropped from the Roaring Knight, as it is super effective against dark types such as the Titan or Titan spawns. Furthermore, with the extremely strong armor of my party members such as the Shadow Mantle, as well as having a few backup healing items, it was almost impossible for me to die during this boss fight. And during this challenge, I didn't really expect anything different. However, in this dumb Ralsei-less challenge, I didn't expect how difficult the fight would end up being. The beginning of the fight was easy. Since you couldn't use the move Brighten due to it requiring Ralsei, you had to be much more careful in your movements in order to avoid being hit while still collecting TP. After activating Unleash for the first time, it began to dawn on me the true difficulty of what I had created. After unleashing, you will get around 2 turns to actually deal damage with your party members. The first is right after using Unleash, where you can chain Susie and Ralsei's attacks at the same time in order to attack it right after it loses its guard. The second time is the turn after, where Chris can also join the attack. This means that for every Unleash, Chris attacks once, Susie attacks twice, and Ralsei also attacks twice. This means that almost half of the total attacks come from Ralsei alone, and while he doesn't do that much damage, the extra help for both the damage and TP is still really nice. On top of that, even after finishing an Unleash, the Titan had only taken around 10% damage, meaning that if things kept going this way, I would need to save up enough TP for 4 more Unleashes, all while attacks kept getting more and more difficult to avoid. As we couldn't use Brighten, getting hit became much more common, and if you weren't defending, they dealt a lot of damage. So deciding to attack in order to get some extra damage in instead of defending wasn't an option, as it was too risky compared to the extra damage dealt. Furthermore, if Susie was knocked down at any point, then I couldn't use Unleash until she got back up, since she was the party member which dealt the most damage, making it almost worthless to activate it while she couldn't fight. Because Ralsei's heal prayer and all consumables were locked off, I had to wait for Susie to naturally heal, all while taking more damage from being hit. Plus, if Chris was downed, then there was no easy way to revive them, as the 2 acts Wait Chris and Revive Chris from Susie and Ralsei used to revive them don't exist, since they never learned their respective actions after skipping the Cap and Cakes fight in Chapter 2, making this much harder. Apart from this, if you wanted to close the game, in case you wanted to go to sleep or something, it would reset you to the last save point, which is the beginning of the climbing sequence, making you waste around 10 minutes trying to get back up to the boss fight. During this boss fight, I died. Well, obviously I died, but I died a lot. I was starting to get really worried that this could turn out to be just like the Roaring Night fight of Chapter 3, but I couldn't give up. Ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy? Yeah, I'm suffering from it. A lot. Anyways, after spending a few hours dying, then, dying again, and again, and again, and again, I made a groundbreaking discovery. After I'd survived long enough to reach the third use of Unleash, Chris and Susie's damage began to increase, and the Titan didn't put its guard back up. Why was this the case? No clue. Maybe it was to stop people that were really bad at timing their attacks from getting too stuck, but it would be what ended up saving me from another night fight. Compared to the rest of the attacks, the unguarded attacks were much easier to avoid, and I was able to hit back hard, easily getting the Titan down to 50% HP, where, after it protected and healed itself up to max health, came the big man himself. Gerson Boom, also known as the Hammer of Justice. Yep, he's back! And with the help of Susie to use the Act Dual Buster, the Titan began taking massive amounts of damage. The reason everyone says this fight ends when you reach 50% HP on the Titan is that if any of your party members are downed by an attack, the Hammer of Justice will just revive them manually with candy, making you basically unkillable. After a few duo acts with Susie and the Hammer of Justice, Susie came up with an action herself, and kamikazed Chris into the Titan, defeating it. After the fight was over, there was only one thing left to do. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, consider subscribing, since when Chapter 5 drops, I'll be there. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.